I started this podcast episode 100 times. Every time I start, I feel like what I'm saying is not exactly what I had in mind. It just feels awkward. There's something inside of me that says that this is not good enough. There's a more perfect way to kick it off, and I just haven't found it yet. And in a way, I feel like that's maybe one small version of me trying to seek growth, trying to be something more than I am. I'm not enough yet. And in a way, this continued seeking of something more is something that maybe keeps me from finding that thing, from finding that growth, from finding that more, because I'm not balanced inside myself. I haven't found the acceptance that I need within me to be perceived in any way. And I'm focused more on how the listeners are going to perceive this episode, this musing, which is so much of my identity. And I guess as I'm thinking about that, the Parsha feels like a very appropriate thing for me to think about when I'm trying to resolve this idea in my head. So, Parsha Terumah, offering, is the literal translation of the word. Starts off, we'll read a few of the first words of the psukim here. Vayichuli Terumah me'et kol ish asher yidbenu libo. Then a few psukim later, va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. So it starts off with, take for me an offering from any person who opens his heart. And then later says, make for me a sanctuary, and I will live amongst you. It feels like all of the phrasing here is just almost right. Take for me an offering. You don't take offerings, you give offerings. Take an offering from somebody who has an open heart, asher yidbenu libo. Why would you have to take it from him? He's giving it. Asuli mikdash, make for me a sanctuary. What would you expect next? And I'll live in it. But he doesn't say that. He says, v'shachanti b'tocham, and I will live amongst you. Everything about this feels like it's almost right, which I guess feels like the right way to approach this problem. So let's look at some of the classical commentaries first. The Kli Yakar explains that when somebody takes, that's actually a real description. This is the more honest way for us to describe what it means to give. I'm sure there's an episode of Friends on this, that whenever you give, you gain in some way. You acquire connection, you acquire direct benefit, you acquire maybe even just a feeling of goodness. The Sfat Emet has perhaps another interesting way of describing this, where he looks at the word truma and he describes it from its root. So truma is harama, laharim, to elevate, this idea of elevation. So when somebody is vaikuli truma, that means that they are elevating themselves. When they elevate, then they open their heart, and then God will want to live amongst them. The Ramban, he describes even the idea that the Shekhinah can only rest when there is an inner alignment. So when a person has this Yidbenu Libo himself, and when they're open-hearted, that allows the Shekhinah to come in, and that's maybe the connection to V'shachanti b'tocham, which the Baal Shem Tov also says is, yes, that's the right way to understand it. When you are open-hearted, when you elevate yourselves, when you take from yourselves to give, that's when God will live amongst you, and that's where God will live inside of you. Really, it shifts the idea of the Mishkan from a physical tent that lives somewhere in the middle of the camp to a internal understanding and a metaphor for people to understand who they are and how they should show up. But let's focus on this idea of the physical tent for just a second. So the Ramban we just talked about, he also brings down the idea that Matan Torah continues directly into the Mishkan. There's sort of a continuous story here. But what's ironic is that we go from this story of Matan Torah, an infinite, visceral experience, perhaps so vast that it cannot be described, to an entire parsha dedicated to describing the measurements, the boundaries, the edges, perhaps even the containers of all of this kedusha. It's all of this wondrous godliness and spirituality that we bring into this sanctuary. So it really feels like we've kind of shrunken the Matan Torah to something so tangible that it's almost lost its power. So in a way, perhaps what the Parsha is really giving us is an idea that that part can shrink and that gives us room to grow. Perhaps this is also this idea of the Tzimtzum, that God makes space for us. So he took up a lot of space on Har Sinai, and now he gives us the space to grow. We'll look at the flow of the Parsha a little bit more, and we see that the Parsha discusses the Ark, the Aron Kodesh, the menorah, the Shulchan with the bread, and it describes all of these inner accoutrements, these inner vessels, before it even gets to the space that they're going to be placed in. Each one described in detail, the materials, how they should be made, some of them in more detail, some of them in less. But the idea here is that each of these things, each one represents a part of the human midah. The ark is an idea of chachma, and the internal consciousness of a human. The menorah is our internal energy, the illumination that we have to bring into this world. The shulchan is an idea of sustenance, how we maintain ourselves, and that energy of focus. And each one of these is spoken about before the tent that we put them in. So again, kind of really reinforcing this idea that we spend time focusing on our innards first before we focus on the coverings, before we focus on how others are going to perceive us. And if we look perhaps just at one small part of this, the kruvim are two cherub-like angels are depicted on top of the Aron Kodesh. And the Kabbalists bring down that each one represented a different kind of an energy, an opposing kind of an energy. One of them was the idea of a Zer Anpin, the other one was a Nukva, one of them was the giver, and the other was the receiver. And we see that when Bnei Yisrael are in harmony, they say that the two angels faced each other. When the Bnei Yisrael are not in harmony, when there is discord, then they didn't face each other. And the voice of the Shekhinah, the connection that we have to the Almighty, comes from between these angels. So if we think about the most inner part of ourselves, we understand that we're going to have opposing forces within us that perhaps are fighting and trying to find balance. And when we come together as a nation, and when we come together and we understand that balance internally, that's when God will speak most clearly to us through that balance, through that sacred space, that sacred internal space. Okay, so now we see something about the flow, the logical flow, the chronology of the writings of the Parsha. But I think one of the interesting things when we think about growth is to look at what's not said in the Parsha as much. Sometimes, you're facilitating growth for somebody, you're having a conversation about how you can develop and become more than what you are. One of the most powerful things that you can do is give them a moment to think. Don't interrupt them, don't say more. Look perhaps at the silence, the things that they're not saying. So in this week's Parsha, there's an interesting omission. What's behind the idea of the Mishkan is the 39 malachot, the 39 prohibitions for what we don't do on Shabbat. The way that we observe the Shabbat is by, in one way, by not doing these things. It's kind of interesting to think about this because the Mishkan here shows us the products of these actions, whether it's a master smith, a goldsmith, a carpenter, a weaver, a carver, whatever kind of master craftsman we have over here, we put a pause on this. Kind of in the same way that Hashem created, the world in 6 days and then he paused, we adopt a similar idea of this for Shabbat. We identify with this identity of being B'Tselem, the creators, and then for Shabbat, we pause from this. And if you think about this as an identity, when we think about the idea of growth, one of the most challenging things to get past is our edges. We identify as something. I am this, I'm not this. We use language that kind of confines us to the being that we are today and holds us back from being able to grow. So again, connecting perhaps the other side of the coin of the Mishkan is this idea that we can free ourselves from that identity, focus on aligning our insides, our values, our strengths, what we have inside of us, and not worrying so much about how we show up in this world. And that frees you up to grow. So let's take a second here and just think about this. We're heading in also, at this time of year to Chodesh Adar. Chodesh Adar is, the end of the year. We don't often think about it like that, but Nisan is the original, the OG of the New Year's in the Torah, and Adar is the last month. And when I think about the last month of the year, I think about this idea of giving. We have gift giving. Normally, it's a Hanukkah association, and the Kratzmach Porkane. But in this case, Purim is perhaps a more accurate representation. It is better to give than to receive. Psychologically, giving brings a whole bunch of amazing things into a being. It releases oxytocin, serotonin, gives endorphins and dopamine. There are many different studies that show how it can actually reduce depression and increase overall well-being, reducing anxiety. And in a very clear way, it also is a way to restore agency, a sense of perceived control. If I can give something, it means that I have, and therefore I can use that to give from myself. So giving has a certain power there. Giving is something that is very central in the month of Adar. We spend this time giving mishloach manot to the people that we love, the people we care about. We give matanot levyonim to those who need it, those perhaps who are requiring some assistance. And at the same time, the entire month, Mishenichnas Adar marbim besimcha. We have this idea that joy increases. And what's interesting is, as we go back to that idea of the Rambam with the Shekhinah, that the Shekhinah can only rest in a place with an open heart, the same thing is said about joy. The Shekhinah can only rest where there is joy. It's a Kabbalistic understanding of things, but joy is that same thing that opens a heart, yidbenu libo. So when we think about this week's Parsha, this combination of understanding perhaps that we're not perfect, that maybe there's another nicer way or a more poetic way to say things, and people want to show up as more than they are. And we take a step back from that. We accept who we are. We accept that perhaps we're on this journey of growth. We accept that we should focus on our inners first, and that we should share that with the world in an authentic and sort of comfortable, giving way, and that will have a positive impact on us too. That the more that we are Yidbenu Libo, the more that we open our hearts, the more that we will be able to take that elevation, Lakachat Terumah, and we do that in a way by reducing the boundaries around us and freeing ourselves up. And if you think about joy, joy is that connective idea. I know for many people, Purim is kind of a challenging holiday. For other people, it's the best holiday of the year. But you find that balance of being able to let loose and not worry about your edges and what's going to go right and what's going to go wrong, and instead to try and connect with people. And if we think about the idea of the Megillah itself, or the idea of Adar, it kind of brings in this connection that we don't see Hashem as much. We're not connected with him in the same way that we were a few weeks ago at Matan Torah. It's on us to bring him and to bring this spirituality and this connection inside ourselves, and to share that in a very positive way with those around us. A Freilichen and a good Shabbos. Abi gesinnt. If that sparks any other ideas, I would love to hear them from you. Like, comment, subscribe. Feel free to share with anybody else that you think might enjoy this.